Hello, this is Dr. James Camp from Lee College in Baytown, Texas, and this is my fourth in the series on starting off in C++. Actually, this is 4A. There will be a 4B on for loops in just a little bit. Okay, so today's project is we're going to calculate some grade statistics. We want a student to be able to type in each of their homework grades, and then we will report back some useful statistics like high and low grades, average grade, standard deviation. Well, standard deviation and median score require us to know how to build arrays or vectors, and that's a few lessons down the road, so we'll get to those two statistics later. So we'll actually write the first part of this program today, and then we'll write the remainder of the program a couple of weeks down the road. We don't know how many grades there are ahead of time, so we can't build out a program that just reads in 3 grades and averages them, or reads in 10 grades and averages them. We just don't know how many grades there are going to be. And we can't use a for loop because we don't know, we can't count from grade 1 to grade 10 if we don't know that there are going to be 10 grades. So what do we need to do if we don't know is we need a conditional loop, a while loop. Okay, and the while loop is going to be based on basically while the user keeps entering valid grades, we're going to keep processing valid grades. Okay, but before we write a program, we always need to plan the program. Very fond of the t-shirt that says weeks of coding can save hours of planning. So let's try to plan out our program here before we start writing the code. Well, what do we need to do? We need to ask the user to enter pairs of numbers. There's going to be an actual points and a possible points. I think I changed the name from actual points to score when I write the actual program here, but whatever. The point is there's the score they were given, and then there's the possible points that they could have earned on that homework. Because I don't know about your classes, but in my classes, homework grades often have different possible points. I don't feel like I need to make every homework grade worth 100 points. We're going to tell the user to type a letter to end the input. This will set our CN operator, CN followed by the input operator, to be false, and that will kick us out of the while loop. And then as long as, or in computer speak, while the user is still entering numbers, we're going to figure out grade percent is actual points over possible points times 100. And then grade percent total, we're going to add the new grade that we just pulled in to our total grade percent. And then we're going to keep track of how many grades we've read in so far. Finally, after we leave the while loop, we're going to want to calculate the grade average as the grade percent total divided by the number of grades. Total divided by number is average. But what about those high and low, or max and min in technical speak, grades? Okay, to figure that out, there's a trick that's been developed in computer science over the years where the first input has to happen before the while loop. Okay, the reason for that is that we have to initialize the max and min values to something. You can't say that the minimum score is going to be 0 because none of your score, you could end up with none of your scores being that low. Well, what if I then say minimum score is 70? Well, it's possible that your person never made any grades higher than a 70, and so, or it's possible that that your student has never made any grades below a 70, and so 70 will be the minimum the whole time, even though their minimum grade was actually a 75. So what we're going to do is we're going to initialize min and max to the first score. Okay, as long as we have one score, it's both our minimum and our maximum. Okay, so as I said, if we have one score, it's both our minimum and our maximum. So we can start with that. And then if the next score is higher, we increase the maximum. If the next score is lower, we decrease the minimum, and so forth and so on. So we're going to write a line of code that says max grade percent equals min grade percent equals grade percent. The grade percent being what we just calculated for that first input. Now, obviously you can't write a line like this in C++. Well, actually, you might be able to get away with that in C++. Then in the while loop, if grade percent is greater than max grade percent, then we switch, we let max grade percent equal the new grade percent, okay? And similar for the min. If grade percent is less than min, then min is going to equal the new grade percent. And then after the while loop, we just report the min and the max that we've found. It's very simple. Okay, so let's set up the program. We're going to include an algorithm header. This is one you haven't seen before in this class. Algorithm provides a min and a max that function, and we're going to use that for keeping track of our minimum and maximum grades. Otherwise, this is all stuff you've seen before here in the header section. We're going to initialize our variables. Okay, number of grades starts off at 0 because we haven't read any grades yet, and some grade percent starts off at 0 because we haven't read any grades yet. So then we're going to prompt and take the first input. The prompt looks like this: enter grades as, and I put square brackets around score and possible points to indicate that those are our individual values there. So you're going to write a score, a comma, and possible points. And then it says type any letter to end. And that will indicate to the user that they can type A, B, C, Q, R, X, whatever, to end the grades. Then we define a score and a possible points and a comma. Okay, what is the purpose of the comma? The comma is a throwaway variable. It's a character variable that lets us catch the comma between score and possible points and then just discard that comma. We don't use it for anything, but this allows us to read score, comma, and possible points in off of a single line. Now we're going to process the first input. Grade percent is going to equal score over possible points times 100. We talked about that earlier. Min grade percent is going to equal grade percent, and max grade percent is going to equal grade percent because, as we talked about earlier, we only have one grade so far, so it's both our minimum and our maximum. And then we're going to add the new grade percent to some grade percent, to the sum of the grade percents, and we're going to plus our num grades so that we now have one grade. Okay, now it's time for our while loop, which is the whole point of this lesson. While loops in C++ look like this. There's a while keyword, and then a condition in parentheses, and then in the curly brackets that follow the while, there are a list of things to do while the condition is true. Okay, so what kind of condition can we use for this? We're going to look at the condition that while cin input score input comma input possible points, as long as that whole chain of events returns valid input, okay, then we'll continue processing grades. As soon as the user types, say, Q, cin input score is going to fail because score is looking for a number and q is not a number. So that's going to kick us out of the while loop. Okay, then we just have to do the same kind of processing of the input that we've done before, except that this time, instead of setting min grade percent and max grade percent to the new grade automatically, we use the min function and the max function from the algorithm header to pick whichever is lowest of min grade percent or the new grade percent for min, and whichever is highest of max grade percent and the new grade percent for max. Then we add the new grade percent to some grade percent, and we plus our num grades. Now all that's left to do is report our statistics. Average is defined as the sum divided by the number of entries. So average grade percent is sum grade percent over num grades. Then we're going to decide that we want to see our output with 2 decimal places. That may be a bit much for some teachers or some students. Maybe they want to only see 1 decimal place on their grades, but it's, we're used to seeing 2 decimal points with looking at money, for example, so it's a nice round number to use. Then we're going to use the left keyword to align the words low grade on the left, align them on the left in the 12-space column that we're creating for them. And then we're going to use the right keyword to align the minimum grade percent on the right-hand side of the 8 letters that we're setting aside for it, or 8 characters. And then we just do the same thing for average grade percent and max grade percent. Okay, so what does this program look like? We say enter grades as score possible points. I typed in 4, pretty representative homework grades, and then I ended with a Q, and it very quickly spit out that the low grade was a 75%, the average was an 86.88%, and the high grade was a 97.5%. Okay. So what have we learned today? We've learned while loop syntax. It's not very difficult to set up a while loop. We've learned how to end numerical input with a non-numerical value by simply putting a numerical input statement in the while loop, as the while loop condition, and that stops the while loop as soon as the user types a non-numerical value. And we've learned how to calculate an average, a minimum, and a maximum value using C++. Okay. I'm sure you will have a lesson to pursue, a program to write based on this at some point. But we also have a for loop video to follow up on this with. So once we get to that, I'll have the next programming assignment for you. In the meantime, good luck and happy programming.